it that we're going to do here, and why are we here? I know why you are here. And we're going to wait for our friends to join us, because I kind of have a feeling that some 20, 30 more of us will be here. Anyway, to kick off this, we are going to listen to the love song of Alfred Prufrock, read by T.S. Eliot. It's going to take some 8-9 minutes, so here it goes.
Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky like a patient etherized upon a table. Let us go through certain half-deserted streets, the muttering retreats of restless nights in one-night cheap hotels and sawdust restaurants with oyster shells. Streets that follow like a tedious argument of insidious intent to lead you to an overwhelming question. Oh, do not ask, what is it? Let us go and make our visit. In the room the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. The yellow fog that rubs its back upon the window panes, the yellow smoke that rubs its muzzle on the window panes, licked its tongue into the corners of the evening, lingered upon the pools that stand in drains, let fall upon its back the soot that pours from chimneys, slipped by the terrace, made a sudden leap, and seeing that it was a soft October night, curled once about the house and fell asleep. And indeed there will be time for the yellow smoke that slides along the street, rubbing its back upon the window panes. There will be time to prepare a face to meet the faces that you meet. There will be time to murder and create, and time for all the works and days of hands that lift and drop a question on your plate. Time for you and time for me, and time yet for 100 indecisions, and for 100 visions and revisions, before the taking of a toast and tea. In the room the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. And indeed there will be time to wonder, do I dare, and do I dare? Time to turn back and descend the stair with a bald spot in the middle of my hair. They will say, how his hair is growing thin. My morning coat, my collar mounting firmly to the chin, my necktie rich and modest, but asserted by a simple pin. They will say, but how his arms and legs are thin. Do I dare disturb the universe? In a minute there is time for decisions and revisions, which a minute will reverse. For I have known them all already, known them all, have known the evenings, mornings, afternoons. I have measured out my life with coffee spoons. I know the voices dying with a dying fall beneath the music from a farther room. So how should I presume? And I have known the eyes already, known them all, the eyes that fix you in a formulated phrase. And when I am formulated, sprawling on a pin, when I am pinned and wriggling on the wall, then how should I begin to spit out all the butt ends of my days and ways? And how should I presume? And I have known the arms already, known them all, arms that are braceleted and white and bare, but in the lamplight down with light brown hair. Is it perfume from a dress that makes me so digress? Arms that lie along a table or wrap about a shawl. And should I then presume? And how should I begin? Shall I say, I have gone at dusk through narrow streets and watched the smoke that rises from the pipes of lonely men in shirt sleeves, leaning out of windows. I should have been a pair of ragged claws scuttling across the floors of silent seas. And the afternoon, the evening, sleeps so peacefully, smoothed by long fingers, asleep, tired, or it malingers, stretched on the floor here beside you and me. Should I, after tea and cakes and ices, have the strength to force the moment to its crisis? But though I have wept and fasted, wept and prayed, though I have seen my head grown slightly bald, brought in upon a platter, I am no prophet, and here's no great matter. I have seen the moment of my greatness flicker, and I have seen the eternal footman hold my coat and snicker, and in short, I was afraid. And would it have been worth it after all? After the cups, the marmalade, the tea, among the porcelain, among some talk of you and me, would it have been worthwhile to have bitten off the matter with a smile, to have squeezed the universe into a ball, to roll it toward some overwhelming question, to say, I am Lazarus, come from the dead, come back to tell you all, I shall tell you all? If one settling a pillow by her head should say, that is not what I meant at all, that is not it at all. And would it have been worth it after all? Would it have been worthwhile after the sunsets and the dooryards and the sprinkled streets, after the novels, after the teacups, after the skirts that trail along the floor, and this and so much more? It is impossible to say just what I mean, but as if a magic lantern threw the nerves in patterns on a screen. Would it have been worthwhile if one, settling a pillow or throwing off a shawl and turning toward the window, should say, that is not it at all, that is not what I meant at all? No, I am not Prince Hamlet, nor was meant to be. Am an attendant lord, one that will do to swell a progress, start a scene or two, advise the prince. No doubt an easy tool, deferential, glad to be of use, politic, cautious, and particulars, full of high sentence, but a bit obtuse, at times, indeed, almost ridiculous, almost, at times, the fool. I grow old. I grow old. I shall wear the bottoms of my trousers rolled. Shall I part my hair behind? Do I dare to eat a peach? I shall wear white flannel trousers and walk upon the beach. I have heard the mermaids singing each to each. I do not think that they will sing to me. I have seen them riding seaward on the waves, combing the white hair of the waves blown back when the wind blows the water white and black. We have lingered in the chambers of the sea, by sea-girls wreathed with seaweed red and brown, till human voices wake us and we drown.
So, once more, I welcome you. Our first session here in Charsou, we're going to have our talks on English. And once more, sorry for the delay. It was nothing that I could control. There are so many different things that I want to tell you to begin with. This being the first session and all. The most important thing is that when Ashkan Khatibi and I were talking about having these nights, the question actually came up to, it kind of the question was in our mind, why literature? Why should we talk about literature? Why is it so important that we're going to have a night here and ask you all to join us to talk about it? Being a student of literature myself, I've always had this question. I have always had this question. Why literature? Why do people go and spend their time to study what a person said hundreds of years ago? What is so important about it? Does it work? Does it still work? A person says something like 400 years ago, 500 years ago. Does it work still, 21st century? This is the question that I think many of us have asked at least once. But the question is very clear, but the answer is not that easy to say and to talk about. You see, the thing is, it was so important that many of us went and wrote books about it. Why literature? To me, literature is like, let's assume that human consciousness, our knowledge, our eternal knowledge, like one unique entity from the very first day of mankind. Now, this entity be so huge and so sublime that it's almost impossible for a person to go and observe it and understand it all. So, I as a person, of course, it depends on who I am, what life I've lived, what I experienced, what my experiments be. So I go and I observe one part of this entity from one side, as he just said, Eliot, to have a lantern and to shed light to one teeny tiny part, ray of light on this entity. So I observed one thing from this consciousness, let's say, and I start writing about it. One person, another person, different people throughout our history, from Charsou to now, till 21st century. These days, you and I, we write, we all write. The fact that you're here shows that you're interested in literature. But the important thing is that in order to become aware of this whole complicated, let's say divine thing, is by studying all the observation of different people. And by people, I mean the people who have gone and studied, actually. They kind of cared about it. So the very first person who wrote the first novel, he was mocked. You see, the very first time that he published it, people didn't understand it. Actually, people mocked him. So Cervantes, when he wrote Don Quixote, so after that, after it was published, people said, like, what is this? An old knight going through like windmills, attacking them? What are you talking about? But the fact that many people, not Eliot of course, but many people are not appreciating their time is that it shows that they were kind of avant-garde. It shows that they kind of moved ahead of themselves just because of one fact, they wanted to know. And I think the reason that you are here is that you're curious. You want to know what we're going to talk about this man. What did he have to say? And hopefully these nights. So I really do believe that literature still works, and especially these days in our dark era, I believe that we are experiencing man's dark era these days. If not the darkest, one of the darkest era of mankind. The problem is that you and I cannot talk to each other. You see, the problem is that all these wars, killing. The problem, you know what I'm talking about. The problem is that mankind cannot talk anymore. Because you and I don't read anymore. Because you and I don't write anymore. There used to be a time when people talked to each other. We wrote to each other. You remember that? We used to write to each other. We used to talk to each other. We used to get around, hang around. We used to be people. But after a while, something happened. This happened. Like this happened. So therefore, I really do believe that the more we go on, the more of technology that we experience, the more we need this literature. During these nights, we'll talk about it. These weeks, we'll talk about the significance and the importance of literature. That why we, the team here, we believe that literature can save us. Literature can save the day. The very first night that we decided to start this, I said that, hey, let's start talking about, I actually told Irfan here, I told him, let's start with Eliot. and many, actually he supported me, but many other seriously, Eliot, are you sure? Don't you want to go with someone like easier and all? Because Eliot is his poetry is the one that even in the States, in the UK, is, it doesn't have, it's not very hot because it's difficult. People don't understand it very easily. But actually I insisted on Eliot because of one reason. Because this guy is the symbol of modern man. And his poetry actually is filled with the problems, the issues, the concerns of modern man. We will talk about Eliot, but these nights, we don't have the time to get deep. We will, as much as we can, but the most important thing that we're going to talk about these nights is that, does this still work? Shakespeare still works? Or something outdated, something fancy that you and I, well, like in the room, the women come and go talking of Michelangelo. Is it something like that? Does Shakespeare still work really in our world with all the problems that we have? You know what I'm talking about, the pollution, the financial problems, the problem you and I are dealing with every day. We want to see this. And during these nights, I'm going to ask questions. I'm not here to give you answers. You know how it works. You know how literature works. Literature is about asking the best question. It's not about answering, giving the best answers. So yes, we're going to talk about T.S. Eliot, Thomas Stearns Eliot, who was born an American and died a British. How many people can say that? The reason that I'm telling you that Eliot represents modern man is because he was born like 12 years or so to the end of the 19th century. He was born in 1888 in St. Louis. Now, if I want to go back to St. Louis at that time in the States, southern state in the U.S., it was kind of the cradle of industry, being close to Mississippi. But the thing is that back then, Eliot, the young Eliot, observed and actually experienced this movement from old times to modernism, and perhaps he was that's why he could be known as the knight of modernist poets. But he was a rebel. He didn't look like a rebel. He didn't live like a rebel, but he actually was a rebel. So what he did was he started studying in Harvard. I don't want to get into biography of Eliot, but these are some highlights. What happened was he moved to Harvard. He started studying in Harvard, and after that he moved to England. Now back then, the parents said that we thought back then it was just a phase he was going through. But when he actually got married there, parents freaked out. So, and he started working in a bank. You all know that. Now, Eliot, the reason I'm telling you Eliot could represent modern man is that modern man is an anxious one. Dualities, dilemmas. He's not certain. He's indecisive. He cannot make decisions quickly. We'll talk about this. This poem, you know that, it's about that. We'll talk about this. He cannot make decision, modern man. He's sexually retarded. Some people might say, far from the idea. So Eliot starts working the bank in England. Of course, he sees Ezra Pound. Next week, we'll talk about Ezra Pound and his influence on Wasteland. Still have a feeling that you have idea what we're going to talk about. After that, he had some problems with the first wife, and kind of remarried at the age of 68 to a person who was like 30, 40 years younger than him. And he died there. But why should we talk about Eliot again? Now, I'll repeat. Eliot was concerned about modern man. He wanted us to kind of feel the problems that we are having. Now, was Eliot writing for people of his time? I don't think so. Was Shakespeare writing for them? I don't think so. Was he making money out of it? Of course. But was he writing for them? I don't think so, because it still works. We will talk about all these nights. You heard him reading the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. You see, when I was talking to some of you, and when I told some of you that we were going to talk about Prufrock and Eliot, they said that, oh, we prefer to start with someone like easier, because kind of Eliot freaks us out, because we don't understand him at all. Let me tell you something. If Eliot or any other poet or writer here told you exactly what they had in mind, it wouldn't be that fascinating. And I don't think we would be here talking about it exactly 100 years after it was published. This poem was published in 1915, 101 years ago. Like Al-Maulana Rumi, aka, says, you see, that entity we talked about is like different people experiencing different parts of this. Now, tonight we're going to talk about this side of that truth. Tomorrow, next week, we're going to talk about another side. The week after that, we're going to talk about another side, so that we can kind of peel this off layer by layer. I don't want to stand here and lecture you all, because this is not about it. We are going to talk about the love song of Alfred Prufrock. You see, at first glance, it's not that easy to understand. It's not that sweet, let's say. But let's walk through it and see if we can get this, we can understand this, to see how this works, what Eliot had in mind. You see, to me, whenever I want to understand a poem, I try to visualize it. We will talk about how to read poetry. We will talk about this in English. And of course, the reason that we are doing this in English is that we try to do this in the language of T.S. Eliot. Of course, I know that there has been amazing translations of this masterpiece of Eliot's. But the reason why we chose this is to try to experience this, to observe this once in the words of Eliot himself, and trying to find out the magic of his words, to see if there is any. Because I believe that when a work like that is translated, of course some layers of it is some layers of it is missing. Eliot, where Eliot stands is somewhere between tradition and modern era. You see, Eliot, being the modern man and all, was a very religious man. He was so religious. We don't want to talk about that side of Eliot. Not tonight. Perhaps next week. His parents were Unitarists. You see, they believed in they belonged to a church where they believed that there is only one God, and Jesus Christ is nothing but a moral man. Was nothing but a moral man. Of course, he was touched by the greatness of God and all, but they actually questioned divinity of Jesus. Having come from that family, Eliot started, and of course being the Harvard student, Eliot started his journey into religion. He actually, at the end of his time, wanted to become a Buddhist, but eventually he stuck with Christianity, and he died that way. Of course, he was a huge fan of traditional literature. The fact that he's talking about Dante Eliot, Marvel, Bible itself shows that. But tonight I want to talk about the fact that can man only look ahead and ignore the past? This is a very important question that we have to ask ourselves. You see, Eliot is Eliot because he was under influence of Baudelaire. Again, we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to open that window because that's a whole different thing. But the question is, can a man have a piece of work, a masterpiece like Eliot, ignoring everything that was behind? Something that we're doing these days, unfortunately. Just because I published a book, I ignore everything that was behind me. So I forget about the rest. This is, do you know what this is? Anyone?